Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is my studio in Jamaica. I'm Susan Clare, and I'm going to be painting for you today a tropical landscape with texture. So a lot of you know me as a member of Chelmsford Art Society, and I'm lucky enough to spend a portion of my year here in Jamaica and a portion in England. I originally grew up in Westcliff and recently spent 7 years full-time living in Chelmsford, hence my connection to you as my local club. I feel that you're my local club. So it's my pleasure to be doing this for you today. Like I said, I'm happy to take any questions through the session if you want to type them in the chat box, and our co-host Chris will read them for me. So before we start, I thought I'd talk a little bit about the inspiration. So obviously, living in Jamaica, most people maybe have had a Caribbean holiday and you think of the sun and the sea and the lovely cocktails and the music, and maybe don't realize there's quite such a huge array of beauty up in the hills. So I live 5 miles up in the hills above Montego Bay, which is on the north coast of Jamaica. And so I'm going to show you a little bit of my garden, which is what I'm going to be painting for you today. Thought I'd just show you. It's a little bit bright out there, so I'm hoping the glare won't overcome the camera, but I thought you might like to see that, especially on a February day. So I'm just going to squeeze around my other camera setup, which is, oh, there we go. So yeah, I'll have my studio up here. It's upstairs of my house, and it sort of doubles as a spare room, but I'll give you a proper tour of that later. And then when I come out on the veranda, here's my view. So a lot of trees. Then I have a little window of view through to the hills. And you can see why these are not the actual Blue Mountains, but you can see why in Jamaica they get called Blue Mountains, because they're really sort of misty and blue off in the far distance. Probably the humidity that causes that, I think. So I love this tree that's right in front of us. This is a bullet tree, very, very hard wood, apparently. And it supports a wealth of bird life, insects, all sorts of things. And then there's a tangle of undergrowth behind it, which is just magical. Below there, our ground, as you can see, is very sloping. And below, there's actually a cave. So I like to keep the undergrowth really natural and wild around the cave, because it protects things like the bats. They need to have dark in there. So if we cut down the trees and stuff, it would get too light and exposed. So just showing you how bright the sunshine is today, really blue sky, white fluffy clouds. We've had some bad weather recently, so I was lucky today that it's so pretty. And what I'm going to be painting for you today is something that makes use of the texture. I'm going to work with the tree that you can see there, the bullet wood tree. And I'll just show you some of the reference pictures I've been taking of it in different lights. So I always start with either something that's actually in front of me or several reference pictures, and then I do thumbnail sketches to decide how I want to portray the subject. So let me just share my screen for a second. And you can see this way, if any of you do want to use these as reference pictures to paint from afterwards, you'll be able to snap these as a screenshot from the video that I'm going to be sharing with you afterwards. So here is the same tree in early morning light. You can see we've got a pale sky. The low morning sunshine is hitting on the branches, the trunk, and giving us much more warm colors. Again, that's quite early morning. I'm not going to paint the rooftop, obviously. Slightly different view, but later in the day, you can see now we've got blue sky, and you sort of lose the definition of what's going on amongst those trees. And this actually I took about half an hour ago, which shows the harshness of the midday sun. And again, you've got more contrasts, but you're losing the softness of the textures and things that are going on in there. So I'm going to be working mostly from these kind of pieces. And this is not the kind of view that says to me, oh, I have to paint this because it's such an amazing composition. It's more about, since it was requested to do the texture, it's more about integrating the texture and making that all fun and part of it. So let's have a look at some of the things I do with texture. So if you've done a workshop with me before, which I know some of you have, you probably have seen me do things like this. This is a seascape that incorporates natural string, plus also things like the mesh that you get around lemons and citrus. And I like to repurpose things which are otherwise going to waste. They can't be recycled, so it's good to. And then I also like to use natural fibers and gesso. Gesso is holding everything together, and also, of course, you can scrape into it and create other textures apart from what you're actually adding in. So sometimes I'll print into the texture and leave the imprint there, but you have to catch the gesso at the right stage of drying. Other times this has got a lot of natural fibers, and this is a half done piece. Just thought I'd bring it out so you can see what happens. And the texture of the gesso, if you haven't used it, is semi-permeable, so it will absorb some moisture, but it's a different absorbency to either paper or the canvas that it's on. So you get some interesting different surface look between one thing and another. Actually, one of these can show that quite clearly. You can see here, there's one color painted on, but here there's gesso and there isn't. So that can be quite a useful tool. Now, what I've found is if I have a composition that has a lot of bright colors in it, you lose the texture anyway. So there's not a lot of point in putting in a lot of texture background if you're going to create a subject matter and details in it that have loads of bright color and contrast. So in order to make more of the detail of, the texture element, we want to keep the part where the texture is fairly uniform in terms of the color scheme, and then we'll showcase what's going on. So I've done some thumbnail sketches and stuff. I've done this one up so you can see it much more easily than my pencil work. So this is basically what I'm looking at. I've got the tree on this side. About 2/3 of the way up will be probably our focal point. And that's about the point where we've got this change from looking through the trees, there's a hillside that makes a sort of solid band of green, which below it is all sort of solid. And above it is lacy trees where you can see the sky holes through between the branches and the leaves. And down the bottom here, I wanted to have some much bigger, bolder textural elements so that those can hold on to your interest down there without being a lot of color contrast with the rest of it. So that's the plan. And because gesso, if you're going to embed stuff into gesso, it takes a good day and a half to dry. So I had to set up the basis of this canvas before so that it would be ready for you. I have other stuff to show you on this camera. I think, yes, let me just show you another one that's very similar. So I took some of the things, this one has a painting behind it so you can actually see where the gesso was put on. And the gesso is holding on to bits of grass. And then this texture is made with a piece of card, which I can show people how to do in my workshops. You can't hold anything too heavy or too three-dimensional. It needs to be pretty flat. So
Susan,
yeah,
can you put gesso over any medium? I mean, I know you probably put it over acrylic, but would it go over the top of oil?
Needs to go under oil, I think.
Right. Okay.
It is the thing that they always use to. It is the same gesso that is on your canvas that's already primed the canvas when you buy it these days. So in the olden days, they would have used gesso, not an acrylic version of, pre the invention of acrylic. It was more like plaster, I suppose, and that was sanded down like 3 layers, sanded between each layer to give you a smooth surface for painting on with oils. So it's a traditional ingredient in paintings, if you like, but I'm pretty sure it needs to go under oils. I'm not an oil expert, but
Okay.
okay. So stuff that I actually put into today's painting. These are bits of dried up bamboo leaves, which I just collected up out of the garden. They've been drying for quite some time in the sun. They're probably a bit too big to use on their own, but you can pull them apart. What we're looking for is things that are lightweight with lots of fibrous strength, so that we can embed them in the gesso without adding too much weight to the entire thing. And so I have actually got some of those in there. I've also got some of this nice hemp string, nice natural string. Pull it apart. Again, you can get sort of wispy fibers and different things to give interest. I sometimes use the burlap bags that our coffee comes in. I also use cotton and string, stuff like that. And sometimes coffee grounds as well that I've previously drunk from and laid them out to dry. And then you can embed those in either paint or in gesso and get a nice sort of sandy texture. So let me just switch over to what do I want to know? Let's talk about what I'm going to paint with. Be easier to show you from here. I like to use big brushes. So I have the Liquitex kind of freestyle brush. I have a couple of different ones of those, 3-inch, 2-inch. And I also have some smaller ones if we get down to details. I never go much smaller than a 1/2 inch in an acrylic painting. Today I'm working on a 20 by 16 inch. I've just realized you want centimeters probably. 41 by 51 centimeter canvas. And as I said, I prepped it the other day with, let's go to the other canvas, the other camera and have a look. So here you can see my canvas. I've got my embedded bits of plant material in the surface. Bits of grasses, bits of, this is actually, I think, coir matting off a coconut tree. So it's not actually woven, it's 2 different threads laid across one on top of the other, but it's very strong and it can be used for all sorts of things. And then I've got my bamboo leaves over here. You can see this. I'm not entirely, this is a bit of an experiment to see how well they sit down in the gesso. The gesso, of course, sinks into the canvas a bit, so you end up, when it's dry, with a lot less than you thought you had put on. Now, up in this section here, which is going to be our sort of heavy layer of dense forest, I've put some suggestions of texture in the gesso, and I did that with the cardboard lifting into wet gesso. Just realize I haven't shown you. This is how gesso comes, usually in tubs or is that wind chime too noisy?
No, can't hear it.
All right. So it's very like white paint, except it's a little bit heavier and grittier, and it takes longer to dry. So you can spoon it out, push it around, play with it, and embed things in it. Sometimes if you don't want to leave the embedded material in there, just having placed it in there and then remove it, you'll still have a pattern in there. So bearing that in mind, I use to get this texture. I don't know if you can you see it? I think it'll be more obvious when I start painting on it. But there's some of the texture that looks like this in the background there. And I do that by layering on the gesso and then using a piece of shiny card. The pieces that come with on the corner of your canvas are quite good for this. Place it down and then lift it off and you get an interesting pattern. Okay, so today I'm using acrylic paints. In Jamaica, it's not always easy to have a nice complete set of one make, but I do love golden. I love Liquitex heavy body paints. So I use these in preference. And then sometimes I have all sorts of odds and ends of System 3 and Winsor & Newton. So I have laid out my palette with a good selection of colours I am going to use. I'm not going to have it vertical all the time because they're heavy body but not that able to stay put. So just running around these, I've got a cadmium yellow, a lemon yellow. That one is actually called chromium green, but it's like a sap green. Some phthalo green, cerulean, that just sort of happened there by accident. This one is a lovely golden colour called anthocyanin, I think. Anthraquinone, sorry, blue. Indigo, that's a Payne's grey, I think. Cobalt blue, deep violet, light violet from Liquitex, magenta, medium cad red, I don't remember which brand. This is quinacridone gold, raw sienna. I quite often use yellow ochre, but I figured I had so much of those come out to use up the end of the tube that I don't think I'll need the ochre as well. Okay, so I will also be using quite a bit of white, but I won't put it out just yet. I don't think we need it just yet. And also probably some light blue from Liquitex, possibly to get our sky going. So
Susan, does the acrylic dry very quickly out there?
yes. So in order to cope with that, I use these very expensive shower curtain caps to keep over my paints, and I also repurpose spray bottles with water and spray them every now and again, which seems to do the trick. But I must admit, if I know I'm not going to be doing right now, I'm painting for an exhibition which starts next week, and it's about 3 times the wall space that I anticipated. So I'm painting quite hard. So I know that I will use up the paint. If it weren't for that, I'd probably lay out the paints that I need rather than a full palette. But when you're working steadily, it really helps to have the palette full because you save so much time with squinchy bits of paint. And I find that your work gets have a more generous look to it. So I also have water pots, paper towel, and that's about it. So I'm going to start with my 2-inch brush here and just going to lay in some colour on the deeper end here. What I want to do is, so thinking about our thirds, my sketch gives me this interesting band of laciness in the treetops. So, and there's also some movement in the level of where the sky, that hilltop line comes, and below that is very dark, and then we want some sort of more interest in the lower third. So bearing that in mind, I'm just going to damping my brush in the water pot, having some paper towel handy in my hand. I'm just going to pick up a bunch of greens and lay them on and see where it goes to. Now, so I'm picking up from several different palette holes so that I've got a bit of blue in there, a darker blue, maybe even a bit of magenta. Picking up a bit more. Some of these are not heavy body, as you can see. They're just sort of filling out my amount of paint that I needed. Sometimes I like to turn over the paint together before I slap it on, but I'm not going to mix it in any way. So I use any old piece of mat board and just by sort of making that much of a mix, we can work with this, bringing it through. Now, when you've got texture on the canvas, one of the first things you notice is you need more paint. It does actually take quite a lot more paint to cover the surface because there's rifts and valleys to sink into. Okay, picking up more of those same colours. I don't want it to be overly dark down here, and there's going to be, okay, interesting introduction of some purples there. Purples will be suggesting going away in the distance, I think. So let's use those a bit further back. Now, when I've put on this texture, the idea was not to be sort of representing the outline of the tree precisely. I put it on roughly where the tree is going to be. You'll see that actually what plays the important role in this is the colours that you put on will override the look of the texture. So it doesn't matter if they're not quite in the right place or if you need to change it up from what came out when you were doing the initial pass with the texture. A bit more those same colours, a bit less magenta this time. So we'll pull this back in. Now, what I'm trying to do here is to create a base layer so that when it comes to the next layer, we'll be showing up all the beauty in those textures by the contrasting colour, which will pick up the surface layer of the texture and not the depth. So what we need to do is to make sure we get the paint all the way into those valleys, the nooks and crannies. Down the bottom, we may have some brighter, it's closer to us, brighter, lighter, more intense greens and yellows and stuff. But for right now, I'm just going to keep this fairly uniform in my treatment of this lower third going on here. And to get, especially when you've got mesh or something, it's quite hard. You almost have to use it like a stencil brush to get the paint to go in between the fibers. If there's some that aren't quite stuck down, hopefully the paint will take care of that. But I usually do try to make sure that the gesso is covering the material completely, because you don't want anything to happen like you know, decomposition to start. It wouldn't be good. Speed this up a bit here. More paint. Be careful, there's some greens in here that I absolutely don't like. When I was doing a commission for somebody once, generously brought me a whole bunch of Winsor & Newton paints, but half of them are colours that I absolutely couldn't stand. So they tend to get mixed in with things sparingly, creating underneath of things. It's not that easy to get supplies in Jamaica, as you can probably guess. So either you buy them in at Miami, and shipping in means lots of duty and stuff like that, or obviously I bring stuff when I come back from England, but there's with the way you wait on airlines is so restricted these days, it's not ideal. The canvas is quite interesting because you can see it's a really good quality canvas. It's the heaviest weight you can buy, and I bought it in on a roll, brought it in from Miami, and had my local handyman create the frames and stretch them on for me. So they're really good quality canvas. Ooh, getting in there. Sorry, this is taking a bit of a time to get into the nooks and crannies. Now picking up a little bit of burnt sienna, sorry, raw sienna and the quinacridone gold. There's an awful lot, when you squint your eyes at the reference pictures, there's an awful lot of yellow greens in there. I think that's something that's comes across in Jamaican pictures, maybe very different to the kind of greens that we use in an English countryside scene. You know, they are intense, and there's not a lot of yellow in them, as opposed to the sort of soft grey green sagey colours that we get in England. Well, that vibrant life force, which can be either your if it's not your taste, then that's fine too, but it's what makes it feel tropical, I think. Chris did actually say to me, "Oh, there's no palm trees," and I hadn't actually thought about it, but I suppose that is something that people think of as it's the palm trees that make it look tropical. But I think there are other aspects to it as well. And, you know, there are palm trees growing 30 feet away from this view, but they didn't happen to be in it. So I thought we'd have a go, see what we can produce without. Okay, let's get this dark into there. Probably help to stick that back down a bit. Always a temptation to want to use all the paint out of the brush rather than go back for more paint. And it's something I'm guilty of, I know, but when I can remind myself not to, I get better paintings out of it, because you know, there's more flow and everything looks more luscious. So I'll try to remember that. So another thing that's different about this kind of landscape is that we're actually here. This is still sort of 7-8 feet from the ground. So I'm not actually doing a picture of all the little flowers that are in the flower beds along beside that tree. I'm doing a picture of what's happening in the branches, the overlapping branches and boughs of leaves and things that are happening behind as you drop down into the valley. So our solid hilltop line is going to be going through here. Down a bit, missed out there. And we have a little dip down here. Okay, a bit more, maybe there. I was actually tempted to paint this how it looks at twilight too, because there's something really magical happens, because this is actually facing west. And so we get this amazing glow coming through the lacy part of the trees. But I did realize that it's bad enough that we've got enough green here. But if I do it with the twilight in the sky, then the entire lower portion is basically just too dark to see any detail at all. So I resisted the urge to go in that direction. So this now is primed and ready to show up the detail that is going to be created by the texture that's been put on there. Just make sure it's worth spending the extra time right now to make sure this is all covered, because if you don't, it'll just show sort of light patches later, and that's not very appealing. You can't go back and put it in afterwards. A bit more into that. Really soaking up the paint, this little patch here with the texture. Yes. Okay. Ready to move on, I think. So what we've got down here, we've got the tree that has its kind of splits into two trunks, and then there's a tree right next to it that usually looks darker and you don't see much of it, but there's a bough that's catching the light that goes back this way, which I quite like. So I'm going to make sure we catch that as a feature. And then there are a lot of different greens in this area. Maybe we'll go, I think we want the greens up here are a little bit lighter. The ones that are above there's still a lot of boughs of branches of trees that they're in newer leaf and catching sunlight more as they go back. Now this is not meant to be the finished thing, that's just like the base color so that we can then work on it with the texture. Over to the right hand side, we've got a lot more yellow in the branches and the treetops. So I'm picking up the cadmium yellow and the chromium green. We could use sap green. And a little bit of raw sienna, because I'd like that to get kind of that olivey look into it. Because it is early morning sun, there's a lot of olivey yellow greens in there. So you might be wondering why I didn't start with the sky. Well, it's partly because the sky's, I think I'm going to put the sky in afterwards and cut in with it, which is always an interesting look. So I'm going to create this kind of branches that are sticking up across the skyline. And they are quite yellowy. So we'll add some more yellow into there and make sure I'm making them a bit bigger than they actually are. So that I can cut in around them with the skyline, with the sky colours, which won't be very bright blue. I think that we need them to be fairly subtle if we've got so much else going on. We don't want to compete too much. Okay, so that's bring some of those yellows into this bit here. I have a tree that is part of this sort of conglomeration of greenery here. It's called a pui tree, and in the springtime it gets yellow flowers on it. And I planted it when I first got the land here. I planted 5 of them, and this one is the one that's made it to sort of supremacy. Like they had a competition, and it's the one that's won out. The last one standing kind of thing, but it's so massive now that it's probably 40, 50 feet across, and the entire thing blooms with yellow blooms at one time. It's quite special. Okay, so while we've got some of these yellow greens, I do like to create my colours one from the next. So as you can see, I started with some dark purpley greens and then moved into lighter greens, and now I'm going into yellowy greens. So they're all sort of moving along one from another, and you can see where you've been, and you can also match back colours if you need to later on, which can be useful. So on the tops there, where we're getting more sunlight on them, we'll just bring some through with a little bit of a texture. And as we're going this way, we brought this up a little too. It depends which reference picture you look at, but I think we'll just bring a little bit of that lighter color so that we're seeing the dark through there rather than sky, but it's still kind of lacy greenery between there. And then I'm ready to put on some color with to map out where we're going with the trunk. Before we go there, sorry, just while I've got these colors still in here, I think we need to bring some. They tend to, when you looking down at this area, you tend to see down into the valley, and your eyes are not compromised by the glare of the sky. When you look up and you see the silhouette almost of the tree against the sky, there's so much glare from the sky that all of the greens in the top of the branches of the tree tend to look more like they're darker greens or almost blackish and colorless. So I'm going to go back to using some of the plain dark green. That's actually indigo and green. So add a touch of the phthalo green and a little bit of magenta just to darken it off and grey it down a bit. So yeah, in the top of the tree here, we can sort of make, I'm probably going to step down into a smaller brush when it comes to putting in the sky, because the sky holes will need to go in between, but I do want to make sure also that I'm getting in between all of these texture bits. Make sure that's accomplished before I move on. We've got a lovely outcropping over here, bough. And then there's a part that comes down below. Any questions so far? Very quiet on the question front. Still working with the 2-inch Liquitex brush at the moment. Remembering I can put the sky back on over some of these greens if they stray too far up. Okay. Back into our yellow or green for a sec. Just want to bring some of that further back through here. Join up with that layer there. Gaps. Don't want to see the whites around the texture bits because that gets misleading. Right here you can see where the yellow has grabbed onto that piece of grass there and highlighted it, and that's what we're going to be employing later on. But for now I just want to make sure it's green all around it. There we go. So moving on to the trunk of the tree. So at this point we need some browner colors. I'm generally tending to work darkish and then later on in the painting, we'll get towards the lighter versions of those colors. So if you're thinking, oh my goodness, it's all looking like it's one big lump of dark mass, that's okay for this stage in the painting. So I'm picking up quinacridone gold and
Susan,
yeah,
I've got a question
sure.
from Carol. When you apply, oh, it's gone off my screen now.
Oh, hi, Carol. Oh, when you apply the gesso to the canvas, do you use a brush or a palette knife? Very good question. So first off, I usually throw it down with a spoon as a blob, and then I spread it out, sometimes with a palette knife. Don't tend to use brushes much because, you know, the gesso doesn't do your brushes any favors. Unless it's a brush that I've deliberately sort of an old one that's got lots of lovely scratchy, hairy bits to it that you could use to improve the texture. So I tend to make the texture and spread the gesso with anything from it's more likely credit card than palette knife even. And then so I leave it thick enough to embed the grasses in if I'm using structural things that need holding up. If it's that I'm creating another texture, like I showed you with the card lift, that doesn't, you know, the texture doesn't happen until you lift the card. So after that, you don't want to touch it again. So really, it's just a matter of spreading it out a bit and then deciding what you're going to do with each separate area. Hope that answers it. So I've got this brownie color and maybe a little bit more yellow. No, too much yellow. I've got a little bit of white on here. I will need more later, but I want to see what that's giving us. Okay, gorgeous light green. Let's use some of that to sort of scatter into here. I know I said we were going on to the trunk, but since I've just accidentally mixed this lovely color, I want to use it. So at this point, you can see I'm using my brushwork. The brush is sort of on its side, so we get that sort of messy, scumbling look. And that's helping to elevate the monotony of the greens. Let's just pick up a bit more of that color. We don't want it just in one place, so spreading it through a bit. Down here is where my other tree is going to come, and then it's got these lovely lacy bits on top in the front there. So we'll have some of that showing there against the dark, deep depths beyond. Now over on this side, yeah, I'm wondering how much of this we can. The texture I created has gone a little bit subtle, so I'm not sure if we'll be picking it up much. But yes, there is some. Can you see this? I can't see that because it's behind all your names and stuff. But so if you get a lighter version of the color to plot on top, all of a sudden you see what was there. I need a bit more, mix that color again. I'm the wrong way into it now. Anyway, green, yellow, a bit more of the browns, the raw sienna. That's approximately the same. And we'll sort of bring some of that over here, hopefully bringing out some of those textures. There we go. Some of the textures that I created. So you don't want so much paint that it creates a nice pull of a block, but you want enough that it highlights the tops of that texture that was created without going into the valleys. Shortcut to doing leaves. Yeah, that's quite nice. I quite like that. And it's quite similar to the look of the way the leaves grow in little batches down there. Looking up more, see if we can get some more of that happening in here. Yeah, we're actually getting some depth into the painting all of a sudden. And this is going to need some sky brought back in here, I think, to make it interesting enough. Bit of that here. So I think you can see the texture doesn't happen until you have something to contrast it with. So some of you did texture workshops with me last summer, which were a lot of fun. We mostly did seascapes, but I think everyone had a good time with that. This year, I'm going to be painting, doing a workshop with you on acrylic inks. Similarly explorative and fun and adventurous, but using the kind of acrylic inks that come in little bottles. That'll be on May the 9th, if anyone's interested. By the way, yeah, you can't see it from that camera, but I have a little notice up here in the corner with all of my contact information and the dates for the workshop. So I'll give you a good picture of that later so you can retrieve it. Okay, so here's this one. This is a little bit too fat, maybe, not sure. No, I think that's okay. We'll work with that. So right now, what I want to go on to, oh, so tempted to go into this texture, but I mustn't do that. While I've still got this on the brush, I'm just going to pull a little bit of it into these leaves down here. I think I may get rid of this, but I just wanted you to see how when you've got a contrast of color, it overrides the texture that you're not seeing the texture anymore. You're just seeing the outline of where the color changes. So that's worth bearing in mind. We have got in the garden, we've got this amazing grass, and it's basically, it is a grass in terms of its genealogy. It looks like it's the size of a tree, but it grows, it's technically a grass. And it's called name's gone out of my head. Anyway, something. And it's sort of yellow and green stripes. So when I was putting this on here, I was kind of thinking about that and seeing if it might work as a feature for the foreground. So we'll see. Otherwise, it might be a case that we want to make it back into the same purpley colors and just highlight a bit of texture around there. But I think you can see how when you do put something on that's, you stop seeing the texture, you just start seeing the outline of the object. That makes sense. Okay, let's go. Right now I'm going to rinse out my brush a little bit. It's the first time I've dipped into the water, if you notice, since I started. I try not to waste paint by letting it wash down the drain. So because I'm changing the sort of family of colors, I want to get into those light browns for the tree trunks. There'll be darker browns to start with, adding lighter later. Lighter later, that's a good phrase. So the easiest thing to, I don't know if you're familiar with these particular brushes, these lovely Liquitex brushes, but they have a habit of wee-weeing on you later if you've washed them out. So the better thing to do is to take a new brush. All right, so I'm just going to let that one sit and stay damp in case we need it again. And moving on to, I think I'll still, should I still use I'm still going to use a 2-inch brush. So this is a short version. I have the long handled version. This is the paddle version of the same brush by Liquitex Freestyle. You'll notice that the bristles are much shorter, which makes it less bendy, but it's really great for getting pressure onto the canvas. All right, because that water, I have several waters lined up here ready to go for change of colours. So clean water, new paper towel, and let's move into some beigey colours. Can you see the reference pictures? Yeah, I think you can see that there's quite a variety of difference between the colours in this version and this version. And then I had another version where it was very much grayer. So it's kind of like almost anything goes, but I want to keep the tone the same as this very yellowy, browny, warm, early morning look. So picking up raw sienna. Put that down in the corner there, picking up some more white. That's going to be great for the highlights on my tree trunk. In fact, maybe we'll just start with some of them because, yeah, we want the texture to come out. So no, we're not going to start with that. Let's go straight in with raw sienna, quinacridone gold underneath. Just making that sure it gets in the nooks and crannies of the texture. And again, this is not going to be all the way up the same, but to start with, we need to make sure the texture's in there. I can go this way. Maybe I've done this earlier so that the greens could have overlapped it partially, but it's always hard to know which one's overlapping which, really. So it doesn't matter that much as long as you go back and do some interleaving later on. There's some great woodpeckers that live in this tree, and so I quite often hear them. As far as I'm not hearing them now, actually. And it's a great crested woodpecker. Anyway, it's black and white spotted with a red cap on. Quite fun to watch, creeping up and down, jumping up the bark of the tree. Brown. I could add a little blue into this to give it depth, but I think we'll do that as we need it later. Probably looking very messy at the moment, but again, I just want to make sure all the nooks and crannies are taken care of. We'll be cutting in with sky colours over this, so it won't matter too much if I go outside the lines. So the exhibition that I'm doing in a couple of weeks' time is it's not the kind of exhibition where you have an opening and all of that. It's more like a permanent display for 3 months. So I'm going to be going there and doing some Instagram lives and stuff like that. And also we're making all of the images available, not only as the originals on the walls, but also available as prints to order. So I'll be sharing links for that as it goes along. Okay, so down here in the murky part, we've still got some browns going on. So I'm picking up that same raw sienna and adding a little bit of indigo to it, hoping it doesn't go too green. It is a bit green, but yeah, a little bit more raw sienna. And let's try the other blue, the anthraquinone one. That's still a bit green. So a little magenta, should take it down maybe into, no, still want it more blue. That's my cobalt there. Okay, that'll do for just tracking out where this other tree is going to be. So it will, at the moment I'm putting the color on top of the texture, but we're going to fix that later when we show up the texture. So for now, I just need to know, where is this tree going? Where is the branch splitting? How is it overlapping with that one? I want it to go this way and interact with that one so that we get a nice something going up there. And so this is the planning stage. It also splits and goes up this way, which is, I think, where I was going with this bit of texture here. And we'll be seeing it turning into the lighter, with the bits of light on those branches higher up and stuff like that, but just to give us an idea of where it's going. That will be there. There's also a branch of it coming up this way. It's very much more red than that, actually. So I'm just picking up a bit of actual red, adding that onto yeah, there's also a branch that comes across this way, up this way. So sure, we need, when I'm not trying to represent it slavishly in terms of, oh, we've got this branch here and that branch there. It's much more of a general picking up the picture. So I'm not trying to get everything accurate, if that's the right phrase, just believable. So adding in a bit more of the same brown into different areas where I can see there's more depth in the amongst the treetops. Maybe some, because these browns are not only branches, they're sort of dead leaves and bits hanging down from last year's growth, that kind of thing. The trees are much too high for us to trim them and manicure them, so they just do their own thing, I'm afraid. Okay. All right. Now, at the moment, we only have those browns on that side of the painting. So I want to bring a few through. I did a few touches here and there on this side, but maybe we can introduce them into this area. Picking up more. Purples in there too. There's some whites showing there with the gesso, so I want to cover those for sure with dark colours before we bring out the texture with lights on top. some of I've drawn these trees so many times, just sitting on my veranda down the bottom, and you get a sort of a strip of tree to look out at. And if any of you bought my children's book, well, it's not really sort of a children's cat lovers book, Banish the Cat, you'll see that these trees feature quite prominently in there. Okay. How's the time going on? Are we break time?
You can do if you like. We've just had 2 more people join us, so there's quite a few of us now. So whenever you like. Are you at a stage where you want it to dry off a bit?
Yeah, I think it'd be quite good if it would settle down and dry off, so that when I put the next layer on, there's no lifting or anything.
Okay,
So
that's fine.
So that you don't feel you just arrived and everyone's having a break, what I'll do is give you a little tour of my studio right now, and then you can have a 5-minute break to go and get another cup of tea or something. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's lovely. We haven't got a raffle to do, so we're all right.
Yeah. I'm just going to spray my paint because it's so funny today. It was quite cool. I know I shouldn't be saying, oh, I'm so cold, because you guys have a whole different level of cold, but it was cold this morning on the hilltop here. And I had on, you know, jeans and a cardigan over. And so it's quite confusing because the last few days have been quite stormy and stuff. And now today it's bright sunshine again. So just to remind you of what the tree looks like.
Oh, hang on.
Yeah, I remember. I've got to go back to the other. Let's go back to the other thing. Okay.
That's it.
Yes, there we go. So there's the tree. Maybe you can, now that you appreciate what I'm trying to do with it, you can see that the depth and intricacy of the branches and stuff in the background there is quite stunning, but it's really quite something to try and represent. Can you see the grass in the background behind the roof?
No, I can't see it.
Okay, I won't try with that then. Okay, so let's have a look around the studio. So I have been doing some pieces a little bit touristy, but I were requested views of the actual hotel itself. So that's not
Is
done.
that where you've got your exhibition, in the hotel?
Yes, it's at the Jewel Grand in Rose Hall. That's the view from the sort of front balcony where you enter the hotel and look out at the sea. This piece is interesting because it's based on my daughter loosely, and I was asked to do a piece to be the cover of a chocolate bar. So it's a rum and natural cocoa chocolate bar, a special edition that they made. And it just won a silver award, I think, in the European chocolate, specialty chocolate things. So here's some pieces that I've done with my students in the online club that I run. This was one we did recently. That was one a few weeks before. So I have members who are across from some in the UK, some in Jamaica, and some in the US. And we don't actually paint together. I pre-record the instructional videos, and then so they paint in their own time. And then on a Tuesday, we get together and do a live Zoom and ask questions and share work and support each other. And it's really fun. So if anyone's interested in that, I'll show you. It's on my Patreon page, and I'll give you that link later. Here's another one. This is actually at the hotel. I was there on a day when the surf was up. Crazy, like almost never seen so much. There were floods in Montego Bay and all sorts of things. But the sky was just wonderful with the clouds moving and the life in the treetops. Just started this one, which is going to be that same surf, rolling surf. This is one I quite love. A friend of mine, Nikki, got a picture of this guy who was peeling breadfruits for customers outside a supermarket in Kingston. And so I just love creating character portraits, and I think he came out all right. This is another one that we did with my online club. So we do a mixture of acrylics, watercolors, and mixed media. This is an example of one of my prints, print on canvas. Shows how well they come out. And I think that's probably about it. Oh, I've got my latest painting for the online club is this one that we're doing this week. So we're doing some English flowers, photographed at Hyde Hall, I think. I take requests from the students as to what we're going to paint. So sometimes it's a whole mixture of things: animals, flowers, landscapes. Okay, welcome back to part 2. So we've got a good background color layer going, and I'm just going to go over to my close-up view of the canvas again. All right, so we've got a rather garish yellow on there. So we'll need some areas to be darker grayish, shadowy falling across it, and some lighter, but with that little glow sort of showing through. So don't think that that's the finished color for the branches. We have got an echo of that in here and some little echoes through the background as well. So the next thing to do, I think, is to work on our tree trunk there. And I'm going to step it down to a size, I think that's a 1 inch, or maybe it's a size 22. These Winsor & Newton Galleria brushes I quite like. I want something that gives me quite a nice knife edge when I've wet it, and so that I can get some crispness into the work that I'm doing. Even though it's blocky, I want it to be where it belongs. Other brushes that I use are the rosemary ones. I love rosemary's brushes too. Okay, so going back to my sort of makeshift palette here, we worked with a brown, we worked with this sort of greenish beige color, and I now want some lightish but still warm colors to develop from that, so that I can put the light on the tree trunks. And some of this could be a solid light, or it could be just the texture being pulled out on top of the color we already created. So I'm picking up the teeniest bit of raw sienna. Maybe that was too much. Let's see, now it's gone back to the yellow. And we need a blue to balance that and make it grayer. Hopefully not green. And a bit green. Touch of red too. It's more grayish. Things are getting sticky here. Yeah, sometimes I just have to sort of spray everything down with water a bit, or use a bit more water to get things to move around a bit more. Okay, no, that color's much too green. So to combat that, put in a bit of, sorry about this, I seem to have gone off base with the color here. There is a pinkishness to one of these references, so I don't really want to focus on that too much. Let's put some more white in there. I think that might be a place to start from. So by running this across, we can see the texture coming through. It's quite nice. Can use that color more solidly down one side. It's almost like actually got 3 splits in this trunk rather than 2. But we are being creative, right? Down here, I want to cover that up a bit, but we'll also put back in some shadowier bits. Now up here, we can maybe get the sense that needs to be darker, not leave that yellow there. But we can get the sense that the branches are splitting further into separate directions by highlighting portions of the texture parts, not necessarily all of it. There are patches where the sun's coming through at a low angle between the other trees and so on. So there's not particularly a lot of rhyme and reason to how the colours are falling that way, but thankfully it means that we can get away with a lot. Thankfully for me. Up here, before we get to the change of the sky, there's a patch where there's a lot of lights falling on this part of the branches there. It's fairly solid right there. And then let's bring up the texture in the lower part. And that's looking a lot more realistic, though we do need still to put some shadows back on. And up here, it's a bit too yellow. Like the globe, but not too much. Okay, here I'm going to just invent some branches that are feeding off from partially visible. Don't want to go too much into, there's a bit of texture there that will help me create that. Again, here it's too yellow, so I want to cover that up, but at the same time I want to work with the texture, so I'll have to come back again and do another color to bring the texture out. Another important point, I always like to use a good quality white. The one I'm using here is golden, I think. Golden, and does seem to make a difference to whether the colours go chalky or not.
So does it make much difference changing, mixing up the different brands? Because golden is a high quality, I mean, but you've got system 3s as well. Can you mix them all together?
Well, what I find is that I try to use the cheaper ones for large expanse areas that are on the lower layers, and then when you come to the sort of top layer that you want it to sing, that's where you use the more expensive ones.
I see.
Right. So quite often, if I have a large expanse of a background to mix with a white in it, then I'll use something thinner and cheaper. Yeah, so there's some. Let's bring out some of these, not necessarily the exact same shape and angle as those branches that are traveling through my reference picture, but because they've been created with this piece of texture, they should be quite fun to bring out. Just a bit touch more water because this is all just getting very sticky and not releasing from the brush. Oops. That's what I wanted to avoid doing. The patch that didn't belong there. Some water on the paper towel. Just wipe it up before it gets too solid. Over here, there's a patch where there's a branch catching the light and some twigs coming off, and so put that there, and a little bit that way maybe. How about this one? Aside from the main trunk, there's a lot of sort of smaller side branches happening in this composition, so quite believable that there's a lots of these little wispy bits of twigs and stuff happening. And of course the sun's coming through in patches, so some areas it might be solid light and others dappled, and this wouldn't just stop like that. It's probably going off at an angle and going up like this. So. Down here we've got some pieces of branches showing through as well, so it's just hint at them anyway. That's enough over there, I don't know. Let's put some light and a bit of more warmth onto, I really want sort of an orangey warmth on the darker trunk. That's quite glowy, isn't it? That the sun on there. It's like there's these little windows that open up and show you little vistas through to the depth and what's going on in the valley below. Valley, it's just more like a ravine. We actually have a cave down there, which is pretty amazing. It's just a limestone cave that's been eaten out by the water over the hundreds of thousands of years. But it has a lot of natural crystals in it that form stalagmites and stalactites and stuff. So it's really quite amazing.
Can you use those for texture?
The crystals?
Yeah.
Okay, have I got one here? They're much too big and heavy. It's gypsum. It's a form of gypsum. So this is, tiny piece of it. You can get little slivers off. It's not very strong. The structure doesn't hold together all that well, but you can see how transparent it is. So when you shine a light down there, it's like a a crystal cave with a see, they fall apart quite easily. It's I think it was used by the Taino people, so maybe 600 years ago. They used it for some kind of ceremonial thing, not sacrifice or anything, but there's a midden in the bottom full of snail shells that are not found in the garden at all. There's no those kind of snails in our garden. I don't live here anymore. So some specialists came and had a look, and they said they thought it was probably used for some kind of ritual. And there are petroglyphs, like carvings into the surface of the rocks on the outside of the cave that represent faces, which would have been like guardians keeping ordinary people out from straying in there and desecrating their ceremonial area. Okay, let's see now. I don't want to put too much texture onto this one because I think this should be the main star of the show and this is a supporting role. So I don't want to make it too much of a contrast when we bring out the texture on that. I quite like this combination, has worked quite well. So for right now, what I'm going to do is just, we've got all of this texture to bring out. And I think this probably should be with some, maybe some of this, but not entirely. I think it would be too much if we did that all over. Not like that one. So in the same way, you've got patches of light coming through and falling on that textured area. Some of these are with a few more connections to make it a little bit more believable. Maybe. We'll see. It's a piece of texture here that I haven't really worked with yet. It's a bit hard to, when they're very low to the surface of the canvas, it's a bit hard to touch them without touching the surroundings, and as you can see. All right, so we want, there's a lot of light falling there, so it would probably also fall here. Let's mix up something with slightly more green in it on the side here. So the same mixture, but with a touch of chrome green in, and then we can bring some of that into this as well. But maybe a bit more of a dark green. Add a bit of that gorgeous blue into the green to give it a shadowier green. And yes, there is a difference between that and the background. Okay, here's a good example of where I failed to get enough paint in on the first layer. So you can see what happens. The little sparkles of white are showing more than the texture, which is what you want to avoid. So beware. This getting lighter compared to the background anyway. Maybe that one. No, not that. Right. What time is it? I might do some sky. Oh no, we've got shadows. A little bit of shadow on this tree needs to come in for it to be believable. So into that shadowy green, we're going to put some of the raw sienna, a bit of the violet. I think should probably be using that. The blue. Green. I want a sort of dull greenish, grayish shadow color that will read as not as important as the other colors. So see how that stands up, whether it needs white with it. It may need some white with it. So that might be all right. There's a creeper growing up this tree as well, which actually this kind of gives it that look with this texture on there. Shadow across there. Some shadows more across here. Where it's going off the page, we can afford to be having less attention brought there. This can be across there. Another batch across in front there. That's the light part. So let's bring the shadows into this bit that's on the side that doesn't quite make sense. Quite a few. Those bands of shadows sort of come across at the same height, don't they? So I'll just work with that and see if that does the job. Yeah, in answer to Leslie's question earlier about am I looking at the tree, was it Leslie? Of course, the lighting has changed. This is an early morning view really now, and the lighting is so different now that it's not much help, apart from the structure of the tree and the pure inspiration. Not much point in looking at it for actual guidance of where to go with it. I also don't want this to be quite so light down the bottom, so I'm going to just bring a bit of bush in front of it at the bottom there. Yeah, let's move to sky before I find myself running short of time. So cleaning out my nice 1-inch brush. This one doesn't seem to hold the liquid like the liquid ones do, so I think I'll move straight into using this one for the sky as well. So at this point, I'm going to spray my paints, and I can use cerulean or cobalt or the light blue that I have. It's this light blue permanent is the name of that one, which I'm quite fond of, but it's a very Caribbean color sky. I don't know that we want it because it's early morning. I don't know that we want such a blue sky. It might be better to keep it quite subtle because there's a lot of yellows and that sort of tones going on in the rest of the picture. Just squeezing out the end of this tube here. Right. And I need a bit more white with it. Yes, I also have this heavy body white. It's quite nice too, so we have a bit more of that. So because I have some on my brush already, I'm just going to mix this in the center, I think. Just turning over the colors, so I still get quite a streaky look. And let's see what this looks like. So here I can decide how much I want to cut in and create this lacy look. I want to sort of get a general coverage first and then cut in. Where I get too bogged down in the details, let's get some coverage on the main area of sky. This, of course, is a bit of a made-up thing right here. That's not actually happening. I could have put some more lacy leaves around it, but I think if I sort of create a lacy look for it, it can work. Okay, there's too much blue in that. The bluest part of the sky needs to be at the top of your arrangement. So that's because the sky right above us is closest to us. The sky near the horizon is many more miles away. So if that's an easy way to remember it, I don't know. With an observation. So I need to cover this up with more white. Of course, there are clouds as well involved, and there are some wispy clouds in the top picture here, but yeah, I guess I'm going from both of those, so it doesn't have to be quite so skimping on the blues. We've got this little hole in here that's telling a story with the top of the hillside that's moving through there. And then we've got some sort of lacy sky holes interacting with these little branches and foliage. Yeah. Trick here is to keep the paint juicy. It's so easy to fall into just letting it get so that you're just skimming over the surface of the texture of the canvas, and whilst that can be fun, I don't think it works all that well for sky arrangements. So you can see the kind of thing I'm looking for here is to put some airiness back into the blobs I've created. But still keeping it as a fairly blocky painting. And that's too square right there. There's just nothing else happening. And the paint's drying up on me. All right, okay. For these fine bits, I could just cave in and use a much smaller brush, but I feel like that's a cop out, so go better. This one also has a lot of, so I was going to bring that sky back down there, I think, about there. This lumpy bit, what is that? Flatten it out a bit. I've got something stuck on the brush there. It's not helping. This in here. Anybody else got any questions? A horrible feeling of, oh, is they still there? So,
Susan,
yes.
can I ask a question?
Yes.
I'm just wondering why in the heat of Jamaica do you not use oils, or do you not like to use oils, or?
I suppose, well, it's a lot of things. I know you can get different types of oils that do different things at the moment, but traditionally I started as a watercolorist. So that taught me to like immediate results. I also learned to paint professionally while my daughter was a baby, so I didn't want any oil smells around that, or even thinner or anything. So I suppose it just hasn't been on my radar. I did do some oils. My mum was a great painter, so when I was about 18, I did some oils. But I really haven't felt. A couple of times I've bought it all and thought, oh, I should do this. It's because, to be honest, compared to watercolor, it's quite easy. But it just doesn't. I don't know. I've just found that acrylics now do that thing for me where it's more substantial than a watercolor. But I still love watercolor because of the things you can do with it. You can't just can't get in some of those effects with anything else. So I suppose that maybe answers the question. I don't know.
Yeah, and I suppose acrylic maybe because it dries quicker, you don't fuss as much.
So I learned a lot of how to paint in acrylics. I mean, I had tried it when I was in Jamaica on my own, just sort of pottering about and just doing it intuitively. But when I came back to England full-time for my daughter's, the end of her education, I took a lot of workshops with Hash and Marie. So I kind of adopted their way of thinking about acrylics, which makes a whole lot of sense to me, is that you're not painting with acrylics to try and do a cheap version of an oil painting. You're painting with acrylics to play to the strengths of the acrylics. And those are bright colors, immediate drying, full-bodiedness that doesn't necessarily blend well. So therefore, when I'm, the style of the painting should lend itself to those qualities being strengths and not weaknesses. So that's why I don't try to blend things. Never have. I just don't find that to be an appealing look in acrylics. And each to their own, some people do that and it works for them. But for me, it doesn't make sense. So that's kind of where I'm at.
I'm liking your tree a lot.
Huh?
I like your tree a lot.
Oh, thank you. I'm pretty fond of it too. I get, every year we have a hurricane season, and every year I get from my husband, oh, don't you think it's a bit too close to the house? Shouldn't we be doing something? No, it's beautiful. We're not doing anything. If it falls over, it'll fall down the hill, not on the house. So yes, I feel quite protective towards it. Okay, so I've gone and put some air in there, which probably shouldn't have been. So to make that work now, we'll bring this down a bit. Because I was chatting and not thinking. Nobody's fault but mine. Okay, so a few more air holes there. And yeah, I'm just trying to think if I should bring that down a bit more. Oh, we've got some little bits of holes through here, maybe. Might be nice. And some here. Thank you for the question, though. Some of these dark areas now look a bit heavy, probably because they've now got other light around them. So, time being of no issue, you could go on making this more and more intricate for forever. But Just needs breaking up the littlest bit to be more believable.
Susan, sorry.
Yeah.
Again, your tree, what did you put down? Was it sort of a grass to make it look like bark?
Yeah, some of these are dried bamboo leaves from the garden.
Your big trees.
So what I did was tore these into little strips and put some.
Yeah.
Some of it is actual just thinner grass. Some of it is string. This bit here with the amazing texture on it, that is some of the coconuts bark.
Oh wow, yeah.
Yeah. That's more like it looks woven, but it isn't.
Like, yeah.
But you know, you don't need tropical things in order to do this. It's just that that's what I have handy. So, you know, you need to, if you're doing it, it's kind of nice when the things that you use relate to the area where you're doing it from. So, yeah. Isn't it? Okay, it's a bit empty there. Okay. Look a bit like I was running out of paint when I was doing this. So let's give me a bit more oomph. So my lightest lights in the whole thing are the sky at the moment. Just for the sake of balance, I'm thinking that it might be nice to put a few little highlights of lighter color on, and of course it's hard to tell how light this is going to be until it's dried, but it might be nice to put a little bit more sunlight onto those. Going back to my lovely beige is probably dried already, so it would have been nice that, yes, I can actually just put more white into that color that's already there. Obviously there's a little bit of blueness, but see if we can just bring out a bit more of the texture with more white on the top there in the sunny areas. Okay, now that's competing better with the sky in terms of where the interest layers areas. Maybe. These bits might be getting the low sunshine too.
I should imagine that's quite good if you've got to do ferns, to do that sort of texture. Where you've got this green down the bottom, what did you put on there?
So I started with that light muddy green that was the same out of here. And
No,
then
the texture. What texture was it?
That the bamboo leaves, but less torn up.
No. Where you've just gone over.
That is
Yeah.
fibers from a piece of string.
All right.
It's pulled apart, yeah.
I have one other question. Sorry.
It's okay.
Um,
Don't be sorry. Who are you,
thank
by the way? I can't see where you are. So just
Oh, no.
who is it I'm talking to? I'm not sure.
Okay.
Sorry?
Kathy.
Kathy.
Ca- Catherine.
Hi.
Hi. The other question I was asking is the organic materials that you put in your paintings,
Mhm.
do they not deteriorate?
Well, that's why I have to make sure they're completely covered with gesso.
Right.
Once they're encased, and also then if they're then covered with acrylic paint as well, they'll be completely sealed off from the air, and moisture, so they shouldn't deteriorate as long as you dry them out good to start with.
Mm.
And that works okay for me anyway so far.
Yeah, okay.
And Trish would like to know what type of varnish you would use. Do you use varnish?
Don't have to, but I have got golden medium that if I'm doing a piece I know it's gonna go outdoors, then I use the golden gloss medium or satin medium, and do like 3 coats. Just have to watch if you want the matte look, you have to make sure you just put that on as the last coat, otherwise it goes you get sort of a milkiness into it. So you can put gloss on gloss with no problem, but don't put gloss on top of matte. And don't put two layers of matte. That makes sense. Okay. I think I'm going to leave it there. If there's any, just wanted to run this by you so that when you watch the recording, you can get the information. So let's just have a close up of that. It has all my contacts on it. Get it straight. 9th of May for the Exploring Acrylic Inks workshop. And we're talking about these kind of acrylic inks with the droppers, ideally with the droppers, doesn't have to have droppers. And we'll be playing with some different ways to get marks into those and making it fun and interesting.
Do we need special sort of paper? Does it have to be watercolor paper?
What I usually do is say you can use whatever surface you like. I tend to like, when I'm doing inks, I tend to like a mixture of acrylics and watercolor sometimes. But it's up to you. If you have a preference for either medium, then just use what you're used to, and we can add acrylic inks into either of them. But if I'm there's those of you that know the SAA's materials, there's a Bockingford paper that's 425 grams, so it's like £200, and that's really good and cheap enough for doing mixed media, and it can hold onto a lot of extra rough treatment. So that's ideal
Bockingford, what
for
was
it.
it?
Bockingford,
Yeah.
425 or £200, 425 grams per whatever it is.
Or £200.
Yes. I usually get that so that if people want to get it from me, they can do.
That's watercolor paper, is it?
Yes, it is watercolor paper, but it's the SAA sells it in a cheap enough. Okay, I think what I'm going to do right this second is wind up the recording. So say thank you for watching, and then you can stay on for a few minutes and ask any other questions we have about anything like that. Is that okay?
Okay.
Thank you, Chris, for all your help, and it's been lovely painting for you. So.
Thank you very much indeed, Susan. It's so different. We don't normally get someone doing textures, and it really shows how well you can utilize them.
Thank you. It's a big experiment, and it is fun.
Mm.
Okay. Thank you.